We have a very interesting topic we're going to speak about today. Today's topic is centered around monitoring, reporting, and verification, otherwise known as MRV, for the carbon credits and the carbon markets. So we've had a lot of anywhere large companies to startups asking us some of the best ways for measuring sequestered carbon. We've also had research scientists over the years and landowners asking if there's some kind of a way they can receive carbon credits and funding for improving the way they manage their landscapes and their agricultural products. And we even have a variety of different carbon registries exploring acceptable or approvable methodologies for doing this. So I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Dave Johnson. I'm one of the principal scientists here at LI-COR. I'll be moderating the webinar. My colleague here, Dr. Sasha Ivins, senior principal scientist. Many of you know him. He has decades of eddy covariance and micrometeorology experience. Many of you have probably met him or collaborated with him over the years. And then we have Taylor Thomas. He is our group product manager. Basically, he's taking and translating what the scientific research community is requesting and helping to translate that into eloquent, innovative product solutions for everybody. His background has most recently, before LI-COR, been at the National Air Quality NCAR in Boulder, so in Golden, actually. So with the next slide here, we want to be sure that we are entering any Q&A using the Q&A button and not the chat, which is different from Teams, which most of us are used to. One question that we see often asked is this being recorded? And this is being recorded, and we will send out a copy of this after the webinar to everyone that's registered. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Taylor.
Great. Thank you so much, Dave. And thank you, Sasha, both of you, for being here. And really, thank you all for joining today. I'm grateful for the opportunity to discuss this topic with you all. As Dave mentioned, we have been working with partners and organizations throughout the world to bring a new monitoring layer for carbon markets. And with this growth and interest, we really wanted to take this opportunity to open up to a broader community of leaders and regulators and scientists who are kind of at the forefront of this global movement right now. So yeah, let's dig in. First, we should start with some definitions for some of the topics that we'll be discussing here today. The first being the carbon market itself. When we talk about the carbon market, we are referring to carbon pricing mechanisms that enable a government or another non-state actor to trade greenhouse gas emission credits. And a supporting element to this is that LI-COR is functioning as a provider for the measurement of the effectiveness of these credits for both carbon and other greenhouse gases. We'll discuss that here in a moment. So what is a carbon credit? We can define a carbon credit as representing the removal or avoidance of a given amount, specifically a ton of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Carbon credits are typically issued by projects that capture carbon dioxide, such as nature-based climate solutions that involve some management intervention, such as planting trees or preventing deforestation, among many others. So what is a carbon registry? A registry is an independent authority that approves, lists, and tracks the ownership of carbon credits. And there are broadly two types of carbon markets where credits and registries operate. The first is what's often referred to as cap and trade market that has mandatory limits on emissions. And the second is a voluntary market where trading occurs outside of a regulatory environment, but is still under the umbrella of registries. A carbon dioxide equivalent, or CO2e, is a standard unit that is used to account for carbon credits. CO2 equivalent enables the inclusion of non-CO2 greenhouse gases in carbon crediting frameworks. And these include other gas species, such as methane or nitrous oxide, which are then converted into CO2 equivalent based on their global warming potential. So a few more definitions. Net zero or carbon neutral, this is often an outcome or a goal that an organization has. And it's a term used to describe a state where this organization or entity's emissions are balanced by efforts to reduce emissions and or remove CO2 from the atmosphere. Additionality is a demonstration that carbon sequestration and or reductions in the emissions associated with the adoption of a land management practice would be greater than continuing with business as usual. And it would not happen without incentives from the carbon market. And then finally, here, nature-based climate solutions. These are sustainable practices that use natural processes and features to address environmental and social challenges. So, and we'll talk about nature-based climate solutions in some detail here. So in recent years, there have been some challenges to the carbon market that have had different origins and impacts to the functioning of the market. Some have been systemic, impacting virtually all aspects of the global carbon market, and others have had rather focused impact on regions or other subsets of the market. And one key driver that I want to highlight here today, key driver of some of the early challenges, has been the lack of tools that accurately inform a stakeholder whether the carbon credit is representing what it is intended to represent. And that has been partially a function of the inclusion of tools that use fairly coarse estimates, such as biomass inventories that are measured infrequently, sometimes on the order of 1 to 5 years. Other estimates, such as emission factors, to estimates and reduction plans used to monitor the effectiveness of a carbon removal project. And there have been multiple cases where this did not end well. In one specific case involving a registry in a voluntary carbon market, there was a general lack of baseline without accurate real-time measurements, cases of overestimations. And the ultimate impact of this was a reduction of the value of the credit from, in this case, about $11.50 to $3.50, which represents roughly 70% decrease in value. So catastrophic failure in this case. So emerging from some of these challenges, it became clear that there was a market need, a true market problem of trust. Trust in a methodology that is scientifically proven, is capable of monitoring large areas, and is not manually intensive to implement. And perhaps most importantly, it needed to be accurate, auditable, and transparent to support the goals of regulated and voluntary carbon markets. So globally, there is just a massive amount of interest, a massive amount of investment in carbon market frameworks, and the exact implementations are sometimes fragmented, while the ultimate goals are nearly always the same, being in some form carbon neutral by a target year. The paths to getting there are not the same, and the ability to monitor progress toward the goal requires a technology that brings trust that you're getting to your destination. And I think of this similar to GPS in a car. You don't need to consider whether using GPS is a good system to use when you're driving around. You simply use it because it steered you to your destination many times before. But this, in some sense, is our first trip. And it's understandable that we make some wrong turns as we learn to trust the tools that get us to our destination. Also, I really want to highlight this. In recent years, there has been a body of work that has served to provide insight into how effective some of the nature-based climate solutions have been, and whether we should pursue some over others based on their potential to mitigate climate change by having a large, sustained uptake of carbon. And researchers from prominent institutions globally have shared their findings, their insights, and their perspectives, and have explored the use of an ecosystem flux measurement strategy to assess nature-based climate solutions using best available science. So this is really exciting. I'm just highlighting a few examples here, but the literature, it really is quite extensive. And in some ways, that has led us back to a technique that has been established for approximately 25 or 30 years, commonly referred to as eddy covariance. Dave mentioned it right at the start. This is a technique that has been around for a long time. It measures large areas over ecosystems and runs continuously. Results historically have been processed after collection, and this has led to longer cycles of data collection to insight. But over recent years, with advances in edge and cloud computing that we'll describe in a minute, these cycles have collapsed to virtually zero, as we'll see. And most importantly, again, this method is transparent, it's understood, it is reproducible, and fully auditable. So at LI-COR, we work directly with a variety of organizations that are seeking to use this tool, this technique, to help steer them toward their goal of generating carbon credits that have real lasting value. And there really are so many exciting opportunities emerging globally to achieve these goals. And it's humbling to work with entrepreneurs and visionary leaders who are starting companies, building registries, evangelizing these ideas, and promoting best available science. And oftentimes, discussions come back to the fact that we must measure what is occurring for us to have confidence that the intended impact is occurring. The days of monitoring strategies and approaches that used to work because that's all that a nascent registry required, those days are largely over. And the organizations we work with recognize that the future of the carbon market is built on trust and is built on best available science. There's a famous quote from Peter Drucker that reads, you can't manage what you can't measure. And he was referring to business and management metrics and key performance indicators to ensure that the business you're running is efficient and effective. And it would be hard to imagine walking into a boardroom in a major company in today's world and talk about how much you believe that your business is doing well without having some ability to measure your progress toward a specific business goal or objective. And just as you can't manage what you can't measure in a business setting, you can't manage what you can't measure in the natural world. And we'll walk through some examples of that. So this is a real life example of the immediate effect of a fertilizer application leading to a 1.8 times carbon sequestration by a fertilized pasture versus an unfertilized control. And this was observed days after fertilization. So in green, we see the improved fertilized pasture having gained 10.7 tons of carbon per hectare. And then the blue series, this is the business as usual case where there is a 6.0 tons carbon per hectare indicated. And such a level of tracking and quantifying the effectiveness of carbon management is completely out of reach for some of the traditional MRV methods. This is another real-life example of continuous tracking of daily rates of carbon gains and losses in traditionally managed alfalfa and rice fields. You see distinct differences between two land uses, and periods for potential improvements through carbon management for each of the two land use types are easily identified. And again, as before, such performance is completely out of the reach for a traditional MRV method. So a few examples of LI-COR's partnerships working together to provide monitoring services for nature-based climate solutions. These partnerships really highlight the need and the value within this industry for trusted, transparent, and accurate methods to monitor progress towards a specific outcome. Another example of a partner and customer who is using the eddy covariance method to perform MRV for carbon sequestration, resulting from management activity in mine tailings, a really exciting and transformative initiative that is actively occurring both in Canada and Australia. And you can see some photos here from the mine tailings. Lastly, we're really excited that the Social Carbon Foundation has launched the first of its kind module for real-time monitoring of greenhouse gas fluxes using eddy covariance. And this really is further evidence that the future of MRV in carbon markets is going to be rooted in best available science and best available tools to achieve and monitor progress toward climate goals. Okay, so we've spent the past 20 minutes or so kind of talking about the context for this measurement approach. And now we'll go ahead and describe the approach itself in some detail, starting with the technique and its requirements for being successful in an MRV deployment, how the new generation of tools compares to the previous generation, will provide an overview of what I refer to as the sensing layer within this new generation of tools and how it performs compared to that of the sensing layer of the previous generation. And then finally, we will go through the steps from a continuous direct measurement, generating the continuous direct measurements of carbon to the analysis ready data in the cloud. That is ultimately what we need. Okay, so this is an image of a carbon node that is deployed over grassland in North America. This is actually at Konza Prairie in Kansas. And this represents a complete eddy covariance system as a sensor. So you can see at the top of this telescoping mast, there is a set of sensors. And then at the bottom, just above the grass canopy, we have a small solar panel, and we have an enclosure that houses integrated power, communications, and data logging. So this really represents the sensing layer for the carbon node. When we look at the eddy covariance technique, it's rooted in first principles physics and the application of this physics in atmospheric science. And one of the key requirements for the implementation of eddy covariance is that we have turbulent flow over a landscape, over an ecosystem, over a plant canopy, whatever it is you're measuring. And so in this schematic, we see turbulent flow occurring over a forested canopy. And the sensors that are on top of a tower in the schematic, imagine them as the same sensors in the image from the Konza Prairie. Those are measuring at very high frequency the change in vertical wind, so capturing these small eddies as they're passing through the sensors themselves, the vertical component of wind as well as the gas concentration. So direct spectroscopic measurement of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It's not an estimate, it's a direct measurement. When you are using the eddy covariance method, it does require that the environment in which you're located is fairly flat, fairly uniform. We can have variability in the slope of the terrain. The terrain can be completely flat. It can have a kind of a consistent slope, but you want to be careful that you're not violating the assumptions of the eddy covariance method in the cases on the left, where we have a sensor that's deployed right at a peak or right at the trough of a valley, or you have these big shifts in the terrain type that would violate the assumptions of the eddy covariance method. LI-COR has a lot of experience helping researchers and end users deploy these in ways that the data will be of very high quality. So if there's ever any doubt or any question, LI-COR is available as a resource to consult and ensure that the deployment will achieve the desired outcome. Another consideration is that, as we saw in the previous schematics, the turbulent flow of air over the landscape passing through the sensor is a function of which direction that the wind is coming from. And so here you see two wind roses, and these are ways to express the climatology of wind, or the expected wind direction at a given location on Earth. And we see on the left, it's omnidirectional, so we could pretty much expect wind to come from any direction. Whereas on the right, we see over this period of time, the wind direction coming from predominantly the south. And so we would use this information to choose where we would place the system so that we're capturing the upwind contributing flux and ensuring that that flux is representative of the broader area of interest in which we're interested in, that we need to monitor for our carbon goals. And for many of you, this is a very familiar time series set of plots. But really what this represents is the set of micrometeorological conditions. We have the driver for photosynthesis, which is the light available to plants to use for photosynthesis. We refer to that as PAR, or photosynthetically active radiation. That's shown on the left for a sunny day. Then we have net radiation, sensible heat flux, latent heat flux, and then finally carbon dioxide flux on the bottom. So you can see on this sunny day, there's a photosynthesizing canopy. It's uptaking carbon throughout the day and then switches to respiration at night. On a cloudy day, we have a less uniform driver for photosynthesis. So we have less available PAR, and it changes throughout the day. So we have less energy generally to drive the processes at the Earth's surface, and that results in a lower and more variable carbon dioxide flux for that day. These are very familiar plots. This is what we expect to see. And really, this is just the starting point for how we start to take these measurements, these continuous measurements, and make them actionable for MRV frameworks. Okay, so now I'm going to go into the carbon node itself. The carbon node is really LI-COR's first IoT first product, meaning that it has been designed from the onset to be a product that covers the sensing layer in the form of the LI-720, to the transmission layer in the form of the IOE module, to the platform and analytics layer in the form of LI-COR Cloud. So it's a solution that addresses this market problem, which is a desire to be able to quantify carbon dioxide fluxes using eddy covariance in a scalable way. And the carbon node really does represent a different approach to eddy covariance than a traditional eddy covariance system. It's using the same science, the same fundamental approach, but there's some key differences. A traditional eddy covariance system that some of you may be familiar with, it's highly configurable. It's capable of measuring a variety of different things. It has increased accuracy and precision for process-based studies, but it demands a lot of the user or group who's deploying it. It takes time and effort to deploy, especially in locations where there is not infrastructure or limited infrastructure for power or mounting. Carbon Node represents really a radically simplified approach. It has lower operating costs, reduced complexity, lower purchase price, and an approach that really puts analytics at the forefront. So let's zoom in on that sensing layer for a moment here. This is the sensor that is part of the carbon node. You'll hear it referred to as the LI-720. It's measuring a lot of things all at once, and all of the processing to arrive at 30-minute fluxes of carbon dioxide occur on the sensor itself. So there's no requirement by for a user to perform data processing to get to 30-minute fluxes. That is how the data comes out from the sensor. You also get a lot of contextual information about this flux measurement. The photosynthetically active radiation that we described previously, we measure that directly on top of the sensor head. We measure the 3 dimensions of wind, both the vertical component and the 2 horizontal components. We measure air temperature, relative humidity, and pressure in situ. So right below the optical path that's measuring CO2 and water vapor. And then we get diagnostic information about the quality of the measurement. And this is output along with the measurements themselves. And I did just also want to take a moment to highlight that as part of the development of this LI-720 carbon node, we spent a lot of time validating the performance of the measurements against gold standard traditional eddy covariance measurement techniques. So we have full confidence in the accuracy of this measurement approach in the form of the carbon node, and we continue to validate that confidence with external collaborators around the world, including in North America, Europe, Australia, really a wide variety of locations, ecosystems, temperatures, regimes, relative humidity regimes. So we're really excited about the performance that we see, and we continue to validate that in a rigorous scientific way. Okay, so we've talked about the carbon market, some of the challenges associated with the carbon market today. We've talked a little bit about the eddy covariance method, some of the requirements for implementing this method, and then we talked about the sensing layer of the carbon node. Now, I'd like to go ahead and transition into discussing the cloud platform layer and the analysis ready data that is being generated within LI-COR Cloud using data from the carbon node. And we really can't talk about data products, data transmission, really any of this without addressing data security as a topic and data integrity as a topic. We, as part of our data collection and transmission approach, we use a protocol called MQTTS. This is a secure communication approach between the edge environment and the cloud. Our cloud platform is SOC compliant, ISO certified, and uses secure technologies in order to preserve the security of the data that we collect. But that's not enough. We know that in order to ensure that the data that's collected is the same data that is in the cloud, we calculate a cryptographic hash for each file that is written locally to local storage on the IOE module, which is the communications layer for the carbon node. And this cryptographic hash, this is a fingerprint for that file. This is transmitted to the cloud so that there's a separate physical location, and that ensures that there's no way to change any of the data as it's being written or after it's been written without knowing that. So we have full confidence in the integrity of this immutable original data as it's collected by the carbon node. Okay, So we'll talk a little bit about the data pipeline here. We have approached this in a way that ensures reproducibility and auditability with a focus on what we refer to as data provenance. And really what data provenance is it's kind of like a lineage or a trail from a starting point to an endpoint. And we have multiple intermediate points along the way that are really important to expose and document and then use as inputs into the increasingly derived data products. So on this slide, there's kind of a lot going on, but we'll dig into each of these levels in some detail here. But starting with level 0, this is the original flux data that was transmitted from the Carbon node to the cloud. This is immutable, as we just described. This is the original flux data. All of the post-processing that occurs to make that data analysis ready is in addition to this original flux data. It's never changed. So when we talk about level 1 or level 2 and so on and so forth, those are derived data products. They're not changes to the original data. But I'll just briefly walk through the steps here. Level 1 is cleaned flux data. So the scientific community has established standards for physical threshold values and statistical methods for detecting dropouts and outliers in a time series of flux data. And we have adopted those approaches so that as data is ingested into the cloud, we check to make sure that it's of sufficient quality to be used for further data products. We do that automatically every night on data that is transmitted. Once we clean the data, then what happens as a byproduct of doing that is that we introduce gaps into the continuous time series. And when we introduce these gaps, if we don't account for that, it would contaminate the accumulations of carbon that is a further derived data product. So we have to gap fill this data. And again, we use a community accepted approach called MDS or marginal distribution sampling to gap fill these data so that they can be used for accumulations. So level 2 is gap fill data. Level 3 is accumulated flux data. We have further derived data products in the form of forecasted flux data. Level 5 is spatial footprint, which is the probability in space that this is the location that's contributing to the flux that you're measuring. And then a level 6 is a spatial extrapolation data product, which we're working on now. So let's zoom in and we'll look at this original CO2 flux time series data. This is over a cornfield in the Midwest of the United States. We see this diurnal trend of carbon uptake each day as the plant canopy is photosynthesizing. There's an uptake of carbon into the biomass, into the soil. So we see that trend, but we also see a lot of noise, and there are a lot of spikes in the data. And if we didn't post-process this series, if we tried to accumulate carbon fluxes using this time series, it wouldn't make any sense. It would not be an appropriate path. And we'll look at kind of the impact of doing that on accumulated carbon flux. So what do? Just like I described previously, we clean that data. So in the blue, this is the original time series that's measured by the sensor as it's collecting data out in the field. The purple time series is the clean CO2 flux. So we've introduced small gaps during the times where these large spikes occurred. And we can always go back to the original time series that nothing has changed there. We've just added a new one. And here we have added a third time series, which is the gap-filled data. So in those periods of time where there were those spikes, we now see what the measurement would have been. And we use the scientific community accepted approach called MDS, which is reproducible. You can always understand how that functions to achieve the gap-filled values for that period of time. So again, 3 steps here. These are 3 separate series in the cloud. The original, which is immutable, that's in blue. The cleaned, that is a derived data product in purple. And then the gap-filled data, which is a further derived data product in red. So this is the same time series, but I wanted to go ahead and zoom in on these spikes in the data. So when we run this original time series data through the post-processing data cleaning algorithm, it identifies these periods of time as time periods that are not of sufficient quality to include in accumulations. So they are removed and they're filled with gap-filled values. But that's what those look like when we see those in the time series data. So let's look at the impact of using original carbon dioxide flux values on accumulated data compared to using gap-filled carbon dioxide flux data on accumulated values. So in the purple here, we have the gap-filled CO2 flux. So this has undergone the cleaning and the gap-filling algorithms. And what we see is this trend over the course of this subset of the growing season where we have a daily uptake of carbon that is a smaller magnitude earlier in the season, and then kind of an increasing magnitude of carbon uptake as the season progresses. And we know what's going on in this particular agricultural ecosystem, and this is indeed what's happening. But if we don't post-process the data, not only is the magnitude changed, but we can see completely different sign changes where we have emissions of carbon as opposed to sequestration of carbon over time. So this is absolutely a requirement in order to get to analysis-ready data that can be further integrated into other web applications or other analytics suites. And we have the luxury at this specific site to have a PhenoCam camera, which is an automated camera that's taking pictures every hour throughout the growing season. We know that the canopy is sequestering carbon. We see that in the growing photosynthesizing corn canopy. And this is just some contextual information about the increase in the magnitude of the carbon accumulation over the course of each day. So another really key consideration for eddy covariance is considering where in space is representing that flux, right? So we need to know, based on the conditions, what is representing that flux value. And what we do is every day, at the end of each day, we calculate a flux footprint climatology for the previous day. And this is represented in geospatial form within LI-COR Cloud. It's also something that's available via API, able to be ingested into other web applications. So you can understand, if you have a deployment strategy that requires that you monitor multiple areas because of heterogeneity, because of a baselining effort, because of really any number of potential contributing factors, you know where in space is contributing to that flux. And I'll show just a quick animation here. And so every day we see this shift, and we can quantify based on the conditions where the flux was coming from for that day. And this has many uses for spatial upscaling or interpolating between flux stations. And it also has implications for further qualifying the quality of the data based on its representation of the area of interest. And so here we see just some representations of some of the data products that are available within the cloud platform. But that's not where they need to end. LI-COR Cloud is a cloud platform like many others, and it is intended to really be a portal for accessing data and also for integrating data into other web applications or servers or whatever you need. And we have a robust and documented device data API. So you can access all of the time series data from not only the measurements from the Carbon node, but also the derived data products that are available in LI-COR Cloud. So you can always access data in LI-COR Cloud or via API. And there's a lot of different tools that are available to you to do that. So here is a representation of the ability to flexibly and dynamically share data. So within LI-COR Cloud, we have the capability for having shared networks. So you can invite collaborators, you can invite other stakeholders to access your Carbon node data, and you can create multiple thematic networks. There are other projects occurring in the same geographies. You can create a network as if it was constructed in that way from the onset. So really flexible. You have a lot of control over who can access the data, and we really wanted to enable this to promote data sharing within the academic community, but also restrict data access to promote data security and data privacy. So very, very flexible approach. So LI-COR's Dr. George Burba has provided some guidebooks for those of you who are looking to write your own methodologies using eddy covariance for monitoring fluxes. And these are available to download from the LI-COR website. We encourage you to reach out if you have any questions about any of these. And then finally, I'd really like to thank all of the attendees today. Know that by being here, you're part of a movement of innovators and leaders in this emerging industry. And LI-COR our goal is to help build the foundational layer of trusted monitoring data to ensure your projects achieve the intended outcome and give you opportunity to assess impact on the timescale that matters. I'd like to leave you with another quote from Peter Drucker. Efficiency is doing things right. Effectiveness is doing the right things. And I believe that this industry will be effective in achieving our collective goals And it's because of the committed and passionate people like yourselves. So thank you again.
Yes, thank you very much, Taylor. Very informative presentation, an exciting topic, an emerging topic. Again, if you have some questions about what you just heard and saw, go ahead and enter those in the Q&A. We have a little under 10 minutes here. I have some questions that came in. I'll focus those to Taylor, and I'll let Sasha concentrate on any written questions that come in. So have about 5 questions here I can run through, Taylor. The first one was, it appears that this can be used both in agricultural and in forest ecosystems. Is that the case? And it seems like, yeah, I'll let you go ahead and talk about that one.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a technique that is agnostic to the landscape beneath it. So tall canopies, forested canopies, short canopies, agricultural ecosystems, all of them are fair game. You have decisions to make around how high you want to measure above the canopy. The higher you go above the canopy, the larger the representative area of the flux is. So that kind of bleeds into, strategies around having lots of smaller areas or a smaller number of large areas. And there are some trade-offs there, but all of those ecosystems are fair game.
Okay. Maybe a similar one here. This was probably stimulated by the slide with the ARCA project. It says, regarding other CDR, I think carbon dioxide removal like enhanced rock weathering, would this technique be suitable for that?
Absolutely. Yeah, so we do have some partners who are pursuing enhanced rock weathering, so application of um, olivine in agricultural settings and seeking to quantify the impact of that management activity on uh, the rate of carbon sequestration into the soils using an atmospheric approach. So that is certainly a viable use case for this ecosystem flux measurement in the form of the carbon node. Yep.
Okay. I know you touched on briefly on the upscaling. There was a question on, I don't know if it was before or after that slide, but if we will help with spatial upscaling, how we might do that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Certainly a very um, frequent question that we get at LI-COR. We are really excited to be working with some prominent partners in the industry and in the scientific community, and we're working towards solutions. Starting with this footprint, understanding where in space could contribute to the flux. But we know that's not where things end. You can't completely blanket the surface of the Earth in carbon nodes. So we need to have some ability to extrapolate and quantify the uncertainty of that extrapolation over these areas of interest. So we will be providing that through our LI-COR cloud platform. And we'll keep you all posted as that progresses and we make those tools available. So stay tuned. We're absolutely working on it. We know it's important, and we're committed to providing that as a product.
Okay. Another one here. I know you talked about transmission plans and that aspect of a carbon node. I know personally from being at LI-COR over the past decade or two, the issues with trying to connect instruments in remote locations. So there was a question that asked a little bit about how our communication and data plans, I guess, how are they included? How does that work with the carbon node?
Yeah, great question. We we have an IOE module or Internet of the Environment module, which is the um, transmission gateway for the carbon node and other sensors from LI-COR. We we take care, it has an integrated cellular modem. And we have a SIM card that is a global SIM card. So it will work throughout the world. You don't need to, call up cell carriers in different countries throughout the world and negotiate a contract or anything like that. It's all kind of taken care of under the hood. And really there's just nothing that needs to be done. You kind of turn it on, it finds a connection, and then it starts enqueuing data and transmitting data, and it makes a connection by default every 30 minutes. So you know when you're supposed to get new data. If there's a misconnection, you can choose to get an alarm that tells you that there was a misconnection from your Carbon node, and that can be something that you can then act on if you need to go out and check on your station.
Okay, let's do one last question here. Someone had asked, I guess there was the picture you showed with several, I guess, systems set up in one field, and they were asking, what is the purpose having that many in a single? Is it to try to determine uncertainty in a homogeneous ecosystem, or what's the goal with that? Looked like a lot of systems in one field site.
Yeah, that image of a single cornfield, it's definitely a well instrumented field. That is a research site at the University of Nebraska, where we have multiple carbon nodes and water nodes deployed in a kind of a co-located methodology. And the intent is really twofold. One, we want to further validate one of the things I was talking about earlier, the performance of the carbon node against reference traditional eddy covariance systems, and then also quantify any instrument to instrument variability. And then as part of that, quantify the even small variabilities within a fairly homogeneous plant canopy, because it looks fairly uniform. The yield is not as uniform as you would think, and so we're doing a research study to quantify the variability even on a fairly small magnitude.
Okay, I think that's a good way to end here. I'd like to thank everyone for attending and participating in the webinar today. It's for us exciting to see a couple things. One is this new product getting out and being used in the environment, and how this market is kind of growing really quick, and the eddy covariance is being used into applicative form. So you saw our emails on that previous slide. So I think if you have any questions on anything, feel free to reach out to us. If you're a researcher looking to, connect with these carbon companies, or a carbon company looking to connect to researchers or any of that, we can help establish some of those connections and help drive this forward with everyone. So again, thanks very much, and we will see you next time.